Mr. Grumpy Nails Fatherhood by Roger Hargreaves. Read by Ken Moss. This is Mr. Grumpy. Mr. Grumpy is a dad. Now I know what you're thinking, but Mr. Grumpy is no grumpy dad. Having 3 kids hasn't changed him at all. I mean, yes, his daughter refuses to be seen in public with him, and yes, he thinks bay is some sort of herb, but he still knows how to party. Even if parties now involve pass the parcel, party bags, and children being sick. It wasn't all plain sailing, of course. Fatherhood doesn't come with instructions, and if it did, he wouldn't read them anyway. It was another normal Saturday morning. Creak went the bedroom door. Pitter-patter went the tiny feet. Ouch! Went Mr. Grumpy, as the toddler shoved a Lego brick up his nose. Time to get up and ferry the kids to their long list of clubs, parties, and playdates, while his wife locked herself in the spare room for her fortnightly lie-in. But really, how hard could it be? It was just like being a taxi driver. If your passengers didn't pay you, made you play the same song on repeat, and wrote rude words on the car window. First, he dropped the 8-year-old at Annabelle's VIP princess party. He'd forgotten to buy a present and hoped Annabelle had put a multi-pack of crisps from the petrol station on her wish list. Next stop, trampolining, but only after a tense negotiation with the 4-year-old, where she insisted on wearing her Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costume under her leotard, followed by swimming, where she insisted on wearing jeans. Finally, he did the family shop and bought an armful of groceries, and despite losing 3 eggs and a head of broccoli along the way, he was still glad he'd saved the 5 pence by refusing a bag. Still plenty of time to get lots of stuff done, thought Mr. Grumpy. Instead, he spent the next 3 hours looking for Boo Boo, a germ-infested blankie with a life of its own, and he completely ran out of time to put that blooming shelf up. A while later, after the kids' 20th game of sledging down the stairs in a washing basket, Mr. Grumpy suggested a brand new game called Close Your Eyes and Don't Move or Speak. It turned out that Mr. Grumpy was especially good at this one and was just nodding off when he heard the sound of the letterbox. That's odd, he thought. Bit late for the postman. When the toddler had been retrieved from next door's hedge, Mr. Grumpy handed over duties to his wife and commenced his important weekend appointment of sitting on the loo and playing a game on his phone for an hour. His wife knocked to ask if he'd found a portal to another world. "You never let me have anything!" screamed his daughter when he finally emerged. "Annabelle's parents bought her a phone and a laptop, and they let her live in virtual reality." "Now listen here, young lady," said Mr. Grumpy. "In my day, I were happy playing with a cardboard box." But suddenly, Mr. Grumpy realized what he was saying. "I am a grumpy dad." Mr. Grumpy couldn't believe it. Something had to be done. He sent a message to the Mr. Men Dads WhatsApp group. "Lads, who's free for a pint?" "Sorry, I can't. I've got to finish my child's school project," said Mr. Worry. "Sorry, I can't. I tried to join in with my son's football match, and I think I have a hernia," said Mr. Bump. "Sorry, I can't. I've got to put that blimmin' shelf up," said Mr. Muddle. None of the others replied, so he called Mr. Mean. "Sorry I didn't get back to you. I'm a bit tied up at the moment," said Mr. Mean. "Oh, should I call back later?" said Mr. Grumpy. "No, I've literally been tied up. The kids have staged a coup. They're revolting against tidying their rooms." "What are the demands this time?" said Mr. Grumpy. £10,000 and a puppy," said Mr. Mean. "Anyway, I'll try my best to come out. Just need to find a babysitter. The last 3 won't return my calls. Mr. Grumpy called Mr. Clever. I'd love to join you, but I've got to put the fear of God into my daughter's new boyfriend this weekend. How are you going to do that? Asked Mr. Grumpy. Take him to one side and ask him how he plans to provide for her. Then challenge him to an arm wrestle. Well, that seems... How old is he? 8. Mr. Grumpy wasn't getting very far, so he decided to try Mr. Cool. Mr. Cool didn't have children. He just had freedom and a disposable income. Hey, said Mr. Cool. I'm just flying my private jet over the Andes, going for brunch at this great new pop-up. I can't get anyone to come out, moaned Mr. Grumpy. That's because you're thinking too small, said Mr. Cool. What you guys need is an epic, spontaneous, legendary night out. An epic night out? Thought Mr. Grumpy. They hadn't done that for years. Not since Magaluf and the curious incident of Mr. Silly and the inflatable banana in the night time. 3 months later, when Mr. Mean had finally found a babysitter, it was time for the night out to commence. Mr. Grumpy was just trying to leave the house for the second time, after his first shirt had been affectionately decorated by a jammy-fingered toddler, when his 8-year-old cornered him. Dad, what do mermaids eat? Why am I pink and you're blue? Where do babies come from? Ask your mother, said Mr. Grumpy. I did. She said to ask you. Mr. Grumpy arrived 20 minutes late, but luckily all the dads were still outside the bar, taking it in turns to touch Mr. Cool's car. Do you think it can fit a booster seat in there? Said Mr. Daydream hopefully. It was good to see the lads again. Yes, there were a few more beer guts and a few more grey hairs. Mr. Forgetful's hair had receded all the way to the back of his neck, but his hat did an excellent job of hiding it. They hit the dance floor and pulled out all the classics. The lawnmower, the sprinkler, the robot, the running man, the stumbling man, the falling over man, and the too old to be in this club man. It was 11 p.m, and Mr. Cool went to get another round. Great, said Mr. Grumpy, as his dreams of bed faded, and he wondered if the bar would serve him a tea. I probably need to go if I'm going to make the last train, said Mr. Good. I think I need to go to hospital, said Mr. Bump, nursing his hernia. Shall we have a little sit down? Said Mr. Lazy. Mr. Cool returned from the bar, and what do you think he saw? All the Mr. Dads were having a nap. They'd completely missed the table dancer, and when Mr. Mean was asked to leave for aggressive snoring, it was time to call it a night. I'm staying out, losers, laughed Mr. Cool. He wasn't tired at all. He loved overcrowded clubs with really loud music, and he didn't fancy going back to his empty flat just yet. Mr. Grumpy was outside the house for an hour before finally managing to get the key in the lock. He tiptoed quietly into the hallway, tripped over Boo Boo, and fell headfirst into a miniature drum kit. The night had been fun, but he was relieved to be home, and it was nice to see the kids, particularly as they were fast asleep. Creak went his bedroom door the next morning. Do you want to hang out? Said his daughter. We can listen to that rubbish music you like and play with the cardboard box if you want. And so they did, for a bit. And then they played on the PlayStation, because it was much more fun. Perhaps it's not so bad being a grumpy dad, thought Mr. Grumpy. In fact, there was only one thing that would make this day more perfect. See you in a few hours, he called, as he grabbed his phone and went to sit on the loo.